Thank you so much for being here. Good afternoon. I'm Evan Smith. I'm the co-founder and former CEO of the Texas Tribune. More importantly, I'm a professor of practice here at the LBJ School of Public Affairs. I'm here today to conduct the interview with our distinguished guest, but also on behalf of Dean DeShazo, who was unable to be here today, to welcome you to the LBJ School. Those of you who are students or have a connection to the community, you know about the blessings of the LBJ School. Those of you who do not need to know, this is a first-class institution. It is a center of thought leadership, as it ought to be, on a campus that is a center of thought leadership. And we've had an opportunity over the course of the last year to bring a lot of really wonderful people to this campus for programs like this. I teach a course each spring, soon to be each spring and fall, on the politics and issues of the moment, and bring guests, elected officials, newsmakers, others into the LBJ School, some just to the class, many as public events. And thankfully, with the launch this year of the Patman Center, and Emily Bandara, the head of the Patman Center, is in the back. She is our hostess today. With the launch of the Patman Center this year, there is an even more, I think, ambitious opportunity to be bringing people to this campus for the benefit of the community, on campus and off, to have serious conversations about things that affect all of our lives. And so it is in that context that I'm so pleased to welcome you, because I believe this is working. And of course, I'm especially happy to welcome Beto O'Rourke back to the LBJ School. He is no stranger to this campus or to this school, as he reminded me. Although on Zoom, he taught a class here once. He was very generous at various points in visiting my class, other classes, and I think everybody on campus is always so happy to see him. He is a native of El Paso. He's a graduate of Columbia University. He spent 7 years on the El Paso City Council, then served 3 terms in the U.S. House representing the Congressional District 16. In 2018, he was the Democratic nominee for U.S. Senate against Republican incumbent Ted Cruz. You may have heard it. No Democrat has won statewide election in Texas in 30 years. Since 1994, and the races haven't even been, in most cases, competitive. But Mr. O'Rourke, Congressman O'Rourke, the most charismatic, articulate, and hardworking Democrat at the top of the ticket in Texas since Ann Richards, came within 215,000 votes of defeating Senator Cruz. The closest U.S. Senate race in Texas in 40 years, a margin of 2.6%. Congressman O'Rourke won what was at the time the most votes ever by a Democrat running for statewide or federal office in Texas history. In 2020, he ran for the Democratic nomination for President of the United States. That one didn't go so well. After kicking off his campaign with an infamous Vanity Fair cover that I'm convinced will be in the first line of his obituary, in mid-March of that year, he failed to get traction in a field of more than 24 candidates and dropped out in less than 8 months. The highlight of that campaign might have been taking the Bidens and his wife Amy to a Whataburger after a Dallas rally 2 days before Super Tuesday. You remember that, of course. In case you're wondering, the future president ordered a Whataburger with cheese and tomato and fries and a milkshake. Of course, he had a milkshake. So on brand. In 2022, Congressman O'Rourke was his party's candidate for governor of Texas. After winning the Democratic nomination against token opposition with 91% of the vote, he faced the 2-term GOP incumbent Greg Abbott in the November general election. Although he raised more than $76 million for that race, the most of any Democrat running for governor in Texas history, and ran a typically energetic and enthusiastic campaign. 2022 Beto ran about 500,000 votes behind 2018 Beto. Governor Abbott's margin of victory was 11 points. In the last 2 years, the congressman has continued to stay active in Texas and around the country as an advocate and an activist. His focus has been voting rights and voter access, among other issues. His main vehicle has been Powered by People, the PAC he started in late 2019. Among other things, it organizes voter registration trainings. And wouldn't you know, there's one on campus following this event. We're grateful that he took the time to be here. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Beto O'Rourke. Good. Nice to see you. Good to be here. Perfect. So I want to start, Congressman, with the 2024 Senate race. if you don't mind, in Texas. Yesterday was the birthday of Colin Allred, the Democratic nominee. I want your birthday present to him to be lessons from the time you ran against Ted Cruz. What did you learn, and what advice would you give him as your party's candidate?
Well, I know that Ted Cruz can be beat. I know that Colin can beat him. And not being humble by saying this, but I would never give him advice because we're such different people, such different candidates. And he's running an incredibly disciplined campaign right now. Far different than anything you would see me do.
Say more about that. What does discipline look like this cycle?
You know, he is making, for example, abortion access absolutely central to this race. If there's one thing that you need to know about Ted Cruz, he thinks that he knows more than you do or your doctor about what you should do with your body, your health care, or your future. The line that he talks about is that exam room that I was in with my wife and she was getting her sonogram. It's not big enough for all of us and Ted Cruz. Yeah. So government in your life, Ted Cruz in your life, the singular defining issue of the 2024 cycle, abortion access, in a state where it is more limited than any other, in a state that leads most of the developed world in a maternal mortality crisis that's 3 times as deadly for women of color. It's not just about access to abortion, which is really important. It's literally the life or death of the women of this state. And if he can keep the focus on that, which he's done a brilliant job of so far, I think he's really competitive. I mentioned, you know, I'm not disciplined, right? I say what's on my mind, it's in my heart. Sometimes that's great, sometimes it's not so.
Well, it got you 2.6% away from Ted Cruz. I mean, you could make the argument that lack of discipline is a bug. I might argue in that race it was a feature.
It may have been a feature at that point, but you know, this is 6 years down the road. And it's a different environment politically in terms of the issues that are dominating the news. And it's a little bit of a different Ted Cruz. You know, I thought when we ran against him in 2018, the guy was a clown. He wasn't getting anything done for the state of Texas or for the United States of America. In fact, he shut down the government, I think our first year in Congress. And I remember we had this reprieve for like 48 hours where both sides declared a truce and we're going to call in votes. You could fly home to your districts, to your family. And I was putting our oldest son, Ulysses, to bed. And he says, Dad, why did you want a job where you would never see us? And I was thinking about the government being shut down. Ted Cruz able to absolutely wag the dog there. The complete breakdown and dysfunction in that place. That was Ted Cruz. That was this lost opportunity for Texas. But since then, that motherfucker tried to stop the peaceful transfer of power from one presidential administration to the next. Never happened before in the history of this country. It is tantamount to treason. It is participating in sedition. It is an invitation of violence that many people responded to. And the after effects are still roiling our country. So rolling through our state legislatures, where in Texas, back to the subject you brought up, we made it harder to vote here than in any other state in the union. Harder to get your name on the rolls to register than any other place in America. That insurrection, you thought it might have been put down on the 6th of September, 2021. It is still alive and well, being run by those in elected positions of public trust across this country. None worse than Ted Cruz. That's another thing that I hope becomes central in this race.
That motherfucker is the sign of that famous Beto discipline, is it not? There's a lot to unpack in that, and I'd like to unpack it. I think you brought up a couple things that I intended to get to later, but as with every interview I've ever done with you, I have to throw my pages up. So you would say that abortion is the #1 issue on the ballot. I would not disagree with you that abortion will be a significant or the significant issue on the ballot, but there are people on the other side politically who would argue that the border is the issue. I know you have strong feelings about this, but it is arguable at this point, and it is to be litigated between now and election day, whether abortion or the border is a greater motivator for people to turn out to vote. Would you agree? We don't know yet.
Yeah, we don't know yet. You know, what's interesting, to me, living on the border, Amy, my wife who's here, and I are raising our 3 kids there. It's the same city I was born and raised in. It's the largest binational community in the Western Hemisphere, maybe in the world. El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, 2.5 million people who come together in this one narrow desert river valley. It's extraordinary. It's beautiful. It's one of the safest cities in America. Routinely, it has been the safest city in America, bar none. Not in spite of the fact that we're a city of immigrants and we're so close to Mexico, but because we're a city of immigrants and we're so close to Mexico. This country has absolutely lost its mind when it comes to immigration. And not just Republicans, to be clear. Too many in my own party are echoing the nativism and the American firstism and this jingoism, where we are afraid of an invading horde of brown people who are coming to force us to take drugs or to rape our daughters or to take our place in school or to get free health care and hotel rooms and cash payments for life. This is the kind of crazy stuff that is circulating not in the dark corners of the internet, but out of the mouths of governors and lieutenant governors and presidential candidates. And this is happening at a time that we have the lowest unemployment since the 1960s, consecutive years, quarter after quarter, where we have 9 million unfilled jobs in the United States of America. The longer we wait to fill them, the more we wait for inflation to come down, the worse our supply chain problems are, the harder it is for us to have the revival that we need in many small towns right here in Texas. Who wants to take those jobs? People who are fleeing the countries they come from, because to stay there is to die there, or to stay there is to mean you're unable to feed your family or lead a life of dignity. They want to come here and do better for themselves, yes, who among us would not? But they want to come here and do better for all of us. And their very presence makes us the successful, the strong, the amazing superpower that stands alone on the world stage today. We didn't get here without immigrants. We won't stay here without immigrants. And it just kills me that there's no one on the national stage making the case for immigration. Yes, there should be a legal, orderly, safe way for people to come here. No one is happy, myself included, with the chaos that you see on the border today. But that is a man-made problem. The walls, the concertina wire, the 10,000 members of the Guard, the DPS troopers, the floating buoy barriers, the drownings that we were seeing, the deaths in the desert. We are so much better than this, but we've absolutely lost our mind. And here's the thing, real quick, last thing. On an issue like this, think about this. On the economy, on inflation, you cannot snow me. I know what a gallon of milk costs. I know what it costs to fill up the tank in my tonneau. On immigration, you don't experience it the same way. You experience the economy, you experience inflation. Immigration, you are told how to feel about it, unless you yourself are an immigrant, or unless you're hosting a family of immigrants. Immigration is a perceived issue. And the fact that we're absolutely freaked out, afraid, anxious, we're acting so small at this moment. I would love for the president to say, hold on a second, folks. The buck stops right here. We're going to fix this. We're going to find a legal way for you to come here, work a job that no one else is going to work, to join your family, to leave a situation that might kill you if you are to stay in that situation right now. So yes, it is a really important issue in the 2024 election cycle. Yes, Donald Trump is running on it, and he's sabotaging any effort within the Congress to fix this.
Well, that's the point. The bipartisan bill, I mean, I had a guest yesterday at the LBJ School who questioned whether it's bipartisan, but the reality is it was bipartisan. It was Senator Langford from Oklahoma, who up until this moment has been one of the most conservative senators in the upper chamber. Along with Democrats, the White House was involved in negotiating this. It was essentially a set the bar, meet the bar, move the bar moment, in that we will only do X if you give us this bill. They gave them that bill, and then they elected not to go forward. It sounds to me like you didn't like that bill.
I didn't really like that bill, no.
You would not have been a vote in the Senate had you been elected. you would not have been a vote in the Senate for
No,
that bill.
no, here's what I would have done in the Senate.
Yeah,
If we had won in 2018, if I had been sworn in 2019, we would have made this the issue and brought the perspective of Texas, the greatest state in the union, great in large part because so many immigrants have chosen
Yeah.
to make this their home, move that national conversation in the right direction. You all know from your study of American history that we go through these periods of panic where the Catholics and the Irish are going to come and ruin this country.
right.
Then it's the Chinese, so we must exclude them from ever setting foot on these shores. Now it is Mexicans and Venezuelans and Haitians and Africans and people are coming from all corners of the world again
Right.
to do better here. So we should never have found ourselves in that position where we were essentially negotiating with ourselves or even against ourselves, where Langford and other conservative Republicans in the Senate were calling the shots, where the lead Democrat is from Connecticut, of all states, to negotiate that. That should have been a Texan
Right.
leading the
Well,
charge.
in fairness, immigration from New Jersey is a problem for Connecticut, right? So there you go. Senator, let me ask you a question as relates. You said this is a man-made problem. Which man? Name names.
Yeah,
Who caused this problem that you describe as a man-made problem? Your guys in the White House.
yeah,
Who caused this problem?
yeah. I think that's a very fair question, a very fair point you're making. Ronald Reagan was the last US president to preside over anything approaching truly comprehensive immigration reform. There were some adjustments made under President Clinton. George W. Bush tried like his best at the beginning of his second term. President Obama had worked out a deal in 2014, the bipartisan group of 8 in the United States Senate. That fell because the Republican-controlled House at the time would not even bring it up for a vote. President Biden introduced something. But I'll say this to the point that you made in trying to be intellectually honest about this. No president since Reagan has really been willing to burn their political capital to get this done. The way that President Obama did for the Affordable Care Act in 2009, the way that President Lyndon Baines Johnson did in 1964 with the Civil Rights Act, and then again in 65 with the Voting Rights Act. You really need a president to do that because as we saw in this bipartisan border security deal, the politics, even of something that narrowly defined, are just impossible. It's got to be like Obama did in 2009. You come in and you just put the full weight, the momentum of that new administration behind something like this. And listen, if we don't do this, not only do we not reap the benefit of all these immigrants who want to make this country better, and they will, not only will we see increasing deaths, and we're seeing record tolls right now on the border. 5 years ago, 6 human beings died in the El Paso Border Patrol sector, which is all of West Texas and all of New Mexico. Last year, 149 souls were lost to us. These are mothers and their babies drowning in the river. These are people who are found dead, dehydrated, sun exposure, the most excruciating way to go down. And what are they trying to do? They're just trying to survive. They're coming to a country that was founded by refugees and asylum seekers from around the world. And they are the refugees and asylum seekers that we have the chance to welcome right now. History books and history students who are here at this school 20, 30, 40 years from now, they won't be able to believe that we treated one another this way. So we need a president, and we need those in power to use that. And if we don't, not only do we lose out on this, the lives, the prosperity for this country, Democrats are going to get their ass kicked in election after election after election, because all the other side has to do is say, build the wall, kick them out, enforce the law. I mean, those are 3 words.
So you're not, so you are not for, I'm just gonna ask this question plainly and then I want to come back to it. You're not for kicking them out.
No, I'm not.
If someone is here unauthorized, you believe that individual should not be sent back.
Well, this is what makes it hard for those who actually want to govern and do the responsible thing on this. There's no yes or no on that. If someone poses a danger in our community, if they have a history of violence, if they're a felon, if they're transporting illegal drugs or smuggling in human beings, absolutely. get them out of this country, make sure that they don't come
But the
back.
mere fact of being here unauthorized is not enough of an indication. I mean, I've noted for my class a couple of weeks ago when we talked about this issue that President Obama was the deporter in chief. People think about past administrations and who did what. President Obama deported more people significantly more than George W. Bush had in the previous 8 years. He was on a Donald Trump in the 4 years, if you look at what he did before versus Obama, significantly more than with Donald Trump.
Yeah, and Joe Biden has deported more people than Donald Trump. You wouldn't believe it unless you saw the statistics.
You have an issue with it.
Joe Biden has doubled the budget of the Border Patrol just in the 3.5 years that he has been in office. That budget is 5 times what it was 20 years ago. We now have hundreds of miles of wall. We have tripled the size of immigration and customs enforcement. If deterrence and detention and enforcement were sufficient, we wouldn't be seeing record numbers right now. No, what you have to do is create safe, legal, orderly pathways for people to come here to do this the right way. And, you know, it sounds simple. It is pretty easy once you have the political will to get that done. And if we don't do it, Democrats and democracy are going to suffer as a result. This is connected to everything.
So I want to come back to abortion a little bit later and talk about that as a political issue in the campaign and as a policy issue, but I want to just come back one more time to the 2018 Senate race.
Yeah.
Something that you did that everybody took note of was that you went to all 254 counties in Texas.
Absolutely.
You did not do that, I believe, in the governor's race. You tried.
Yeah, we
you thought about it.
Yeah.
You went to a lot.
Went to a lot.
A lot.
Yeah.
But I remember you going around to those 254 counties in the Senate race. I even said to you at one point, you're going to Mule Shoe and Dime Box. I hope you're getting pie because you're not going to get votes, right? Like, these are places where Democratic candidates have not feared to tread for a very long time. And indeed, while you moved the needle some as a consequence of doing that, in the end, you did not crack the 25% mark in rural Texas. No Democrat in the last 5 election cycles has cracked the 25% mark in rural Texas. And it turns out it's rural Texas that decides the outcomes of elections. We've seen that cycle after cycle. Would you advise Colin Allred to follow your path in 2018 and try to find votes in those places? Or should he, as is often posed as the alternative scenario, try to prioritize growing the vote in the urban areas that we know are Democrat curious?
I don't think they're mutually exclusive.
Both. You would do both.
And again, I want to be clear, I'm not advising.
Right. Well, I'm asking what.
He's on a great campaign. He will.
But you understand the choices.
I do. Let me tell you why I think it's so important for me.
Yeah.
And generically for a candidate. If you win that Senate race, you represent those people.
Sure.
In Muleshoe, in Dalhart, in Tyler. How are you going to serve them if you haven't shown up and listened to them?
Yeah.
What are their concerns? What are their hopes? What are their dreams? How will you know if you've done the job for them if you never met them literally where they are? And here's the thing, it's not going to happen overnight, and you're going to think I'm crazy, but those are our voters. And I'll tell you what, I was calling a person I met in Dalhart, Texas. You all know it's at the top of the Panhandle. And I said, hey, these wildfires seem like they're creeping up close to where you are. They're in Canadian Texas right now.
Right.
You and your family, okay, doing great. Tell me what's going on in Dalhart. And he said, man, people are pissed off about this voucher thing because our public schools and our public school teachers don't get the resources that they need now.
Yeah.
And the governor's talking about draining what we have to send kids to private schools in Dallas, in Houston, and in Austin, because there is no private school in Dalhart, Texas. So you know another thing they're pissed off about? What the governor's doing on immigration. Because who works in the meat packing plants, on these farms, in these agricultural operations? It is the immigrants. No one born in this town, no matter how much you pay them, is going to take one of these jobs. We need the immigrants right now, and the governor's stopping them from getting here. Unions, this is a big railroad hub, and there's a big issue with the unions related to that. Who's standing up and making this case? It would be a Democrat, but there's not even a Democrat running on the ballot. So sometimes, and take it from a guy who's run and lost, even if you do not win the race, the fact that you can connect people to this cause, to this party, and it's not going to happen in a given cycle or a given visit by a given Senate candidate in 2018. It's that consistent repetition. It's growing that base. It's our Powered by People volunteers. We're in all these rural communities across the state of Texas. It's going to happen at some point, just as it did for Republicans after 150 years of Democratic dominance. At some point, I
Yeah.
hope you have to agree it's going to crack.
Well,
It's a matter
yeah.
of time and effort.
I'm conscious of what John Fetterman did against Dr. Oz in
There you go.
Pennsylvania last time. You know, we've talked about this. We have talked about this before. You know, James Carville's famous line about Pennsylvania is that it's Pittsburgh and Philadelphia separated by Alabama, right? John Fetterman campaigned aggressively in the Alabama part of Pennsylvania and got the Republican margin down. He didn't win those counties, but he got 34, 35, 36% of the vote in that race in 22. He ran 5 points ahead of Joe Biden 2 years earlier. And he was able to win Pennsylvania in part by making inroads. Your strategy would be do the same thing. Campaign in the Alabama part of Texas, even if you're a Democrat, and make inroads.
And you know, you also have to do what you love. Like you clearly love what you do. I get that from you, and I think it's what draws people to you. I think that's why you're so good at what you do. I love going everywhere. I love being with people.
Yeah.
Amy and I were in Junction, Texas, in the 22 race, and they put us in the library annex that, you know, for some reason, that's the one place we can have the meeting. There's no air conditioning. It's in July, right? And there's like sweat coming off the walls. And there's 40 people packed in this annex. There were how many people outside? 120 who had come to protest my visit.
Yeah.
They're each wearing AR-15s, AK-47s. Some have multiple guns on their persons. They're holding signs up. And we leave, we get out of there, get in the truck. And Cynthia, who's with us, is like, when you get in the truck, just drive and keep driving until you get out of town. I made the mistake of stopping at a little coffee shop because we heard that the woman at the coffee shop was a supporter. I later realized that was a mistake because I outed her in the community. So we both played it off. That we
Where's she living now? Right.
Yeah. We stopped at that little coffee place, and I don't know if you remember this, Amy. People had followed, protesters had followed us, and they circle around my truck and pin me in. And I get out of the truck, and they just start screaming and yelling at me, and mostly it's about guns. One guy's wearing a t-shirt with an AK-47 and it says, "Guns don't kill people, Hillary Clinton does." So just to show you who we're working with. And then I said, okay, listen, I've heard you, you yelled at me. Let me just ask you a few questions. Those 19 beautiful kids who were just slaughtered in Uvalde, the guy who killed them was 18 years old, was able to legally purchase 2 AR-15s, hundreds of rounds of ammunition. Could you get behind raising the age to 21? Give us 3 more years to intervene in that young man's life? Yeah. Okay, how about this? You don't have universal background checks in Texas. So you can buy a gun out of the back of someone's car if you've been denied a gun because you couldn't pass a background check at a gun store. You think we should have universal background checks? That would have saved 8 lives in Midland and Odessa. Yeah, I get behind that. I have to go through a background check. Okay, last one. How about a red flag one? The El Paso shooter killed 23 people in my hometown. His mom called the cops in Allen, Texas, when his AK-47 came in and said, "Hey, I need some help. This guy is troubled, he's disturbed." The cop said, "You know what? Perfectly legal, nothing we can do. You're on your own. Good luck." He drives that weapon 600 miles, kills 23 innocent, beautiful people in my hometown, 2009. They're like, yeah, I can get behind that as well. So there is common
Look,
ground.
Congressman, the polling on guns, just to pick on the issue that you're talking about, is clear. That overwhelming majorities of people in the state support the things you said, support a ban on high-capacity magazines.
There you go.
But we don't live in a representative democracy.
But you've got to go make that case there, you know? And part of the reason all those people showed up is no one ever shows up in Junction, Texas. Greg Abbott's not going to show up there. Those votes are in the bank for him. They've never been represented. They have never been heard. Finally, someone's come, and they're going to give them a piece of their
Yeah,
mind.
but isn't that what happened in South Texas? I mean, the inverse of that is that people in South Texas have said for years, Democrats take us for granted.
And it's true.
They assume that we're going to vote for them cycle after cycle. Greg Abbott and Republicans started showing up in South Texas, and what do you know? That vote is now up for grabs in a lot of communities.
You just made my point. And I think that is in fact the case. And I think that the dirty secret among Democrats is that if you're black or you're brown, historically, your vote was taken for granted. And Democrats were off chasing the new shiny thing. That might be the suburban soccer move. That might be whatever. That's why I say it's not mutually exclusive. We would go to the reddest counties on the planet,
right,
to make sure that they knew that they were not written off. But we go to the bluest precincts in Texas to make sure that they knew they were not being taken for granted. Is it hard? Yeah. I mean, Amy can tell you I spent 9 out of every 10 nights on the road.
In that Senate
race, did the same thing in the governor's race. In a state of 30 million people, 254 counties, it's the only way I know how to run. Now, Colin I think is gonna run much smarter than I did, and I think he's gonna have a great chance to win this race, but we gotta get behind it.
One of the challenges that Congressman Allred will have, that you also had, is that Texas is a very low turnout state relative to the other 50 states. And it's a low turnout state, particularly in the areas that you're campaigning where you need to turn votes out. We have had this conversation before.
Right.
I say this is a red state. You say back to me, no, it's a non-voting state. And I say, you're proving my point. It's a red state because it's a non-voting state. I will always stipulate that if every single person in the state who is eligible to vote voted, it is closer to a 50-50 state. But that's not the case. And as a consequence, because the other side does a better job of getting their votes out than you all do of getting yours out.
No, that's not it.
But well, what is it? It's a math problem, Congressman. It's not a problem.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
What is it?
It's a democracy problem.
Tell me about that.
I'll tell you about that. First president in the state of Texas,
Yeah.
1965, signs into law the Voting Rights Act.
Yeah.
For the first time, creates a multiracial democracy in the United States of America. This man came from the same state which in 1923 banned black people from voting. Not euphemistically, not through a literacy test or tell me how many jelly beans are in the jar. In black and white, if you are black, you cannot vote. 1923, the white primary law was not brought down until 1944, in large part thanks to an El Pasoan, Dr. Lawrence Aaron Nixon. So we have that. It's reauthorized in 75 thanks to Barbara Jordan, who creates a provision for language minorities. So all of a sudden, you have Raza Unida candidates who are winning elections in Cotulla, Texas, where LBJ taught grade school. You're seeing a rise in the sharing of power that is reflective of the population of Texas. It's a beautiful thing. Reauthorized in the 80s and the 90s. 2013, the Supreme Court, under Justice Roberts, in their infinite wisdom, says that we no longer have a problem. Justice Ginsburg likened it to putting the umbrella away in the middle of a rainstorm because it's kept you dry thus far. Immediately, and I'm not exaggerating, within minutes, Texas imposes the strictest voter ID law in the state, in the country. Since then, more than 700 polling locations have closed in Texas, twice the number of the next closest state. Where are they being closed? In the fastest growing black and brown neighborhoods in Texas. So when you see the video footage on election day in November, they're bound to show you the 7 or 8 hour long line outside of Texas Southern University. It's wonderful that people can and are willing to wait 7 or 8 hours to vote. But why do we impose this indignity upon any of our fellow Texans? Because all the other polling places in that area have been closed so that those people will not vote. So I strongly disagree with you. I don't think they're better at turning their people out. I think they've made a science of keeping our people from actually being able to exercise their constitutional right to decide their government and those who will represent them. And we have a real fight on our hands right now. Since that 2013 gutting of the Voting Rights Act and the Shelby versus Holder decision, it has gotten worse every single legislative cycle in the state of Texas. But we've been up against this challenge before. That white primary law that was passed in 1923. Yeah. Lawrence Nixon, LBJ, John Lewis, the people who literally shed blood and gave their lives to create this democracy that so many of us take for granted. We have to take that inspiration and example right now and make the most of this moment, because if we fail, I'm convinced that we could lose this forever. 247 years into the experiment, we might very well lose what Lincoln called the last best hope of Earth. And it will happen right here in Texas. I mean, Texas is leading on abortion, on immigration, on anything that you care about, including, most importantly, democracy, which makes everything else possible. That's why I'm doing the work here, along with Kate and Amy and everybody who volunteers with us. There's no place where the fight is more important than this one. And that includes this democracy and making sure that we overcome these barriers. So,
I mean, you and I are not in disagreement. It's just a question of what the reason is for the voter turnouts to be so low. You're saying the reason is this is the plan working exactly as intended.
Yeah.
Right, that this is voter suppression. Well, I'm agreeing with you that there are complicated reasons, including some of the ones you mentioned, for why the vote total is as low. But the TLDR of this is still that it's a red state because not enough people on your side are either able or are choosing to vote. It is a math problem. right? It is a math problem.
I just want you to say you agree with me.
Good luck with that. Yeah, but I mean, I think we understand that the challenge right now for Democrats is to figure out how more people can vote. Part of that is motivating people to register, which you and yours are trying to do.
Yeah.
Part of it is motivating people who have registered to turn out, because it's a leaky pipe, right? Eligible voters, unregistered, okay, you get them registered, that doesn't mean they vote. So it's a question of how you get people from this end of the pipe to that, and also, very important, there are laws in place that make it impossible or much more difficult than is necessary for people to vote. We agree about that.
Absolutely. I mean, in most states, you can register to vote online. You cannot in Texas. Many states have automatic voter registration. You turn 18, you're a citizen, you're eligible, you're registered to vote. Many states have same-day voter registration. Holy shit, it's election day. I forgot to register to vote, but I can go register at the polling.
Motor vote?
Texas has none of those. And for Kate and Amy and I, and any of you who want to join us in registering voters in Travis County, we have to be a sworn and certified volunteer deputy registrar. Very often in most counties, you have to go down to the county courthouse, take a test, pass that test, get your certificate. If you fail to turn in the voter registration forms that you got within 5 contiguous days, it's a major criminal offense. You cannot register people in the other 253 counties unless you get certified individually in those as well. Why are they doing this? I mean, it's clear that they're afraid of you. Why did they move the polling location away from Texas A&M for the first time ever in 2022? That staunchly conservative, reliably Republican voter base is not so reliable anymore. They might very well vote for Beto. Why do they split Prairie View A&M into 2 distinct precincts to confuse students about where they're registered to vote and where they can actually cast that ballot? This stuff is so pernicious, and it is absolutely in every aspect of our lives. The gerrymander, which takes place in every state in Texas, it's a racial gerrymander. Good chance that if you're black or brown, you have been drawn out of a congressional district where your vote might have a deciding impact into one where your vote effectively and mathematically has no power.
Yeah, we don't have any competitive congressional races really anymore.
On purpose.
That's true. Well, the other one that you didn't mention is the decision to limit the number of drop boxes.
One drop box.
To 1 per county, so that Loving County, which has 200 people or whatever it is, I'm sorry I've gotten that wrong, but it's in the vicinity of 200 people, has 1 drop box, and Harris County, which has 4.6 million people, has 1 drop box.
In 22, in the primary, you all remember this, 11 or 12% of the primary ballots cast by mail were rejected. The high watermark previously in Texas was 1%. Right. 10 to 11 times rejected. That has an influence on whether people are going to vote. Right. I can't tell you, we were talking earlier about, I spent a semester teaching at the Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago. A lot of Texans who go to school there, so many would come up to me and say, I tried to vote for you, but they never sent my ballot, or they never received the ballot that I sent back to them, or I could not convince them that I was an eligible absentee voter in Chicago. Right. It's anecdotal, it's not data, but I think it is indicative of the problem we have here and who it is they fear in this state. Right. Like to your point, if the electorate resembled the population, you would not have the worst abortion ban. You wouldn't have a $7.25 an hour minimum wage. You wouldn't have the least insured population. You might have Medicaid expansion. You might have legal marijuana. Absolutely. Right. I mean, the reality is all the polling, we've talked about this over here at the LBJ School, that if you look at the polling on so many of these issues, it is out of sync with decisions made at the Capitol. We don't have a representative democracy. The reason for that is they have nothing to fear back home because their districts have been drawn in a way that it's an incumbency protection for them. That's right. Right? Yeah. Our elections are not competitive, and that ultimately confuses it. Let me go back to the current president, if you don't mind, please. What do you say to Democrats this primary cycle? Protesting the president's and the administration's policy on Israel, who have chosen to vote uncommitted at this point and are threatening not to vote for him in the fall. You know there are a bunch of people in a bunch of states who are what I just described, who are doing what I just described. What do you say to them? First, I say that I voted for President Biden in the Texas primary in March. Unhesitatingly? Unhesitatingly. He has been one of the best presidents this country has had in the last 50 years. You just look at the results and the outcomes. He has slashed childhood poverty, and I think nowhere more so than in the state of Texas. Expanded access to healthcare, made massive investments in infrastructure, literally the bones of this country. The first president to be able to pass meaningful, and it was meaningful, legislation on climate change. He has a very tricky hand to play internationally, globally, with Ukraine, obviously with what's happening in Gaza and now Iran. And I think he's done a really good job. So very happy to, very proud to.
And you ran against him. You didn't know going into this that he'd be the best guy for this.
I didn't know going into it 2020 that he'd be the best guy, but he absolutely is. And he's been a phenomenal president.
Yeah.
You asked me about those who are voting uncommitted. I think that is in keeping with some of the best traditions of this country. Peacefully, non-violently, small d democratically, registering your opinion, pushing politically the person with the greatest power in this country to do the right thing. And I'll tell you, it worked. Within days of that Michigan primary, where I think more than 100,000 voters in that state voted uncommitted, for the first time you hear President Biden talking about a ceasefire. And he's only moved more boldly towards the humanitarian side of this issue, while making sure that we keep the defense of Israel and the return of those hostages in focus. We also want to make sure that we stop the slaughter and bloodshed and the famine that is taking place in Gaza right now. So I think that works, and it works both ways. One, it gets the president moving in the right direction. Two, it shows those voters that he's listening to them. He believes in this democracy. He might have won and earned their votes. It's not too unlike LBJ in '65. He told Dr. King, I don't have the power to pass voting rights. I just can't get it done. Civil rights was a big enough lift. And King leaves that meeting, the Oval Office, and he turns to Andrew Young and says, let's go out there and give this guy some power. And those protests, those marches, those state house sit-ins that were taking place across the country, leading up to, culminating in 24-year-old John Lewis crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge in March of 1965, beaten almost to death in the process. And thank God for the press, you know, the true champions of the people, not the enemies of the people, who broadcast those images around the country and around the world. That got Johnson's attention. 8 days later, which is like light speed, he convenes a joint session of Congress, and he puts those civil rights and voting rights marchers, especially John Lewis, in the pantheon of American heroes. He says, Lewis is the same guy who was on the front lines in 1776, the same guy who brought the Confederacy to its knees in 1865. He is this guy willing to put his life on the line for this extraordinary democracy, make sure that we have one. And you, members of the House and the Senate, have the power to follow his lead and confer that right to vote. By the summer of that year, he's able to pass the Voting Rights Act. Johnson's a great president. We sit here in a place named after him, but he did not make that happen. He didn't make it happen on his own, but he was pushed by the people. That pressure is so important. Lincoln talked about public sentiment is everything. And I think that public sentiment being voiced on Gaza is pushing the president in the right direction. I'm proud of people who are doing this, and I want them to come back to Biden.
Well, let's talk about that. You know, an election is a choice, not a referendum. And I understand where some people who are objecting to the policies in Israel might say, if the choice before me is Biden versus not Biden, I'm mad. And I want to register my anger by voting for not Biden, which is the uncommitted vote. But come the fall, it's going to be Biden versus Trump. There are people who say, I can't vote for Biden under these circumstances. And my response back to people has been, whatever your political philosophy is, remember this is a choice.
That's right.
Right? How do you convey to people who feel so strongly on one or another or a third issue the stakes of this election? We are in the LBJ School today for a series called The Future of Democracy. Many people believe, although it's kind of glib to say it almost these days, it hangs in the balance in this election. So how do you make that argument to people who feel so strongly about this issue? Because there are people who say all the time, I can't vote for them. I have heard them with my own ears.
Yeah.
What do you say to those people?
You know, I try not to say anything. I try to listen, understand where they are.
After you listen for a while, what do you say? Because that only goes so far, man.
You know, I tell you, there's a real power in that.
Yeah.
And I don't think enough people, who are running campaigns or in political offices do enough listening. I did a town hall meeting every single month while I was in Congress for 6 years straight. All comers welcome. No holds barred. I learned so much. I became such a better representative for it. And really, in the process of conversation where I'm listening and I'm also talking, we can come to consensus. I think that's the way to do it. To say like, look, you're just electing Donald Trump if you are mad at Joe Biden right now. I've heard people have that conversation. It is so insulting to the person on the other end to say, essentially, you're dumb, you're an idiot, you're doing this stupid thing.
Yeah.
Say, listen, I want to hear why you feel this way. Where are you coming from? What do you want at the end of the day? Well, I don't want the United States to pursue this given policy. Okay, well, let's talk about how we can change the policy within an administration that's willing to listen to you, as I've been able to demonstrate Biden has actually done.
Yeah.
What he's doing now is reflective of where he's been pushed by the people there. This other guy, Donald Trump, could give a shit what you think. And if you do not like our policy in the Middle East right now, wait till you see Donald Trump absolutely unhinged and unrestrained in a second administration. So to your point, Evan, it's a binary choice at the end of the day. It is going to be Trump or it is going to be Biden. But I want to make sure that I'm listening to you, including what is most important to you in the argument I make for you with Biden. I just think that's really important.
I hear you.
We can't talk down to people. We can't judge people. We can't do that.
Totally agree. I hear you when you talk about the economy and how the unemployment rate is so low, and the infrastructure bill, which after being told for 4 years, every week was infrastructure week. Now we can't get over infrastructure week.
Right.
Like, every week is infrastructure week. You know, billions of dollars coming to this state and other states in the form of the infrastructure bill. By the way, people who voted against that bill are only too happy to put out the press release when the money comes to their district, right? Like classic politics. The Inflation Reduction Act, all the things.
Yeah.
Okay. He's getting, it looks like, no credit for it if you believe the polls, which I maybe don't, I don't know. But his approval ratings have not shown anything like credit given for having gotten to this point. Is it too simple to say they have a communications problem in the White House, they haven't told their story? There's something deeper going on, because when you look at the W's on the board, you're not seeing that reflected in a level of support. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. Told Amy this story, but the guy that I go to get a haircut named Manuel, barbershop's called Chema's. We talk about politics usually. And here's a guy who immigrated from Mexico in 2009, and the violence was just horrible in Ciudad Juarez. You know, had a barbershop there, opened it up in El Paso on Goffin. Great guy, voted for Biden in 2020. But we were talking the other day, and he said, I don't know if I can vote for Biden again. So tell me what's going on. And he said, you know, see this, you know, the blue liquid that they clean the combs in?
Yeah.
So this gallon used to cost me $2.30. Now it's $5 and a nickel. My combs cost more. Everything I use has gone up, and it hasn't come back down. And now I used to charge $12 for a haircut. Now I'm charging 20, and the people in this neighborhood, they can't afford anymore, but my prices have gone up. I don't know that I can stay in business. He blames the president, and I can say, listen, versus any other first world economy, President Biden has left everyone in the dust. He's brought our inflation rate down lower, even though he wasn't responsible for the pressures that caused it in the first place. I talk about unemployment, I can talk about GDP, the stock market, doesn't matter to this guy. His prices have gone up, and they have not come back down. How the president communicates to him is a real challenge. And as others have put it, he's been a great president. He's not the greatest candidate right now, right? In part because of his age, and it makes it harder for him to communicate, to share that message, to say, this is all the great stuff I've done, and to tell Manuel at Chema's, this is how your life is going to be better with another 4 years of Joe Biden in the White House. What that looks like, I don't know.
So you don't think they're making a sufficient case?
It hasn't reached Manuel, right? And Manuel is indicative of other people who are struggling right now financially, despite the gangbusters.
Manuel is us. I mean, I think you called out an example that we may as well just look to and say, did you pass the Manuel test or not? He's not passing the Manuel test, at least as of this point.
That's right. And so, but you know what? It's incumbent upon all of us. If you want to see Joe Biden reelected, and I do, it's not just Joe Biden's job to get that done. I've got to make the case to Manuel, and I will. I'm going to get my hair cut every week if I have to.
Okay, that's a little weird, but fine, I get it, okay. Let me ask you a couple more questions, and then I want to go to the audience, because I know that, as with always, is always the case with events that I have the opportunity to interview, there are a ton of people who have questions. So you mentioned abortion earlier, it's a big motivator. So in Texas, Texas loves to be first and best at everything. Texas was first and best, it feels like, in banning abortion. There's been a long path that got us here in terms of putting impediments to the procedure being accessible. Even if it was legal, Texas tried to make it so hard to access it that it had the effect almost of not being legal. We had a state representative in for a public event at the LBJ School yesterday. He is running for Congress for an open seat, may or may not get elected, but we talked about abortion. He is pro-life. And he said, I am actually, in response to a great question from our student Katie Spence, he said, I am actually for exceptions. But when the bill came before him in the legislature, effectively no exceptions, and he voted for it, he's like, well, I would have preferred exceptions, but I had the opportunity to vote for a pro-life bill, and I chose that. We have a state that has not created any room, no rape, no incest, no health of the mother. If you are someone who cares about access to reproductive health care in a state, where is the hope here? I mean, you have the former president now has basically said, we're going to leave it to the states. If you take him at his word, who knows if he's serious like this, we're going to leave it to the states.
Yeah.
Well, that means that Texas is going to do the things that Texas does, which means that's it. Like, where is this as an issue in a state like this? If you care about this, where is the hope for you?
Yeah, I tell you, it tries us, right? And Amy and I were walking the other day on the mountain, Franklin Mountains, that you're familiar with in El Paso. And like couples often do, you can start talking about, you know, what's next in life. And should we start a pizza restaurant in Sunset Heights? Should we spend a year and, you know, stuff that you might not actually be able to do, but go spend a year, you know, living in Central America or whatever. And then we started talking about staying in Texas, and you know, thinking about you know, our daughter Molly's 15 years old, and in this state, she does not have the right to make her own decisions about her body or her future. Texas now leads the nation in school shootings. 2 years almost to the day of Uvalde, nothing has changed in the state to make that event any less likely than any other school. Our 3 kids go to wonderful public schools in El Paso, Texas. Which,
by the way, on average, Texas is spending $4,000 per student below the national average. Like, there are many things that, as you think about living here, you go, is this the best or the right place?
So we had that conversation. Right. Are we doing our kids right by staying here? Should we move somewhere else? Yep. And as we thought about it, as we talked about it, I think we came to the conclusion, you know, this is actually the most important place to be, because all of these things that we care about that we're describing are on the line and will be decided in the state of Texas. And if those of us who have the ability to leave actually flee the state, then we have left those who have no choice whatsoever, and they're left to their own devices and their own defense. And that's not right at all. And once I got there in my head, once we got there in our heads, I mean, I think there's almost a joy and a hope in this. Hey, we're here for the long haul. We're here to fight, and we're meeting people all over the state. Amy and I were in Canadian, Texas, super small town in the panhandle of the state, very conservative town. I'm giving a talk, I wrap up, and I'm about to leave, and this woman shoots up and says, I didn't hear you talk about abortion. And I wonder, I don't know if unconsciously I had not said anything about abortion because it was such a conservative area. I just maybe assumed people didn't want to hear about that. No, she's fighting for it in Canadian Texas. There are folks all over the state. And let's remember, 50 years ago, 52 years ago, abortion was just as illegal in the state of Texas as it is today. But it was 3 Texas women, one of them being Jane Roe, Linda Coffey, another attorney, 3 women prevailed upon an all-male United States Supreme Court to pass, there you go, to pass, Roe versus Wade, which for nearly half a century protected the right to privacy to make your own decisions about your own body, your own health care, your own future. That was won by 3 Texas women. I mean, talk about hope. Yeah. Not only can we do this, we've done it before against much longer odds. That is true for abortion. That is true for voting rights. Dr. Nixon's story, LBJ's story. I mean, we've been in these fights before, and we've come through before, and we will prevail. Again, it's a matter of time and effort. The more effort we put in, the more of us are willing to make that effort, the shorter the amount of time we'll have to wait. And for my kids' sake, for your kids' sake, for the future generations that will follow us, you know, we cannot be found wanting at this defining moment.
So not just Colin Allred, but Joe Biden and Kamala Harris need to make this the issue in your mind.
I think it is
one
the issue.
of one as opposed to one of many.
Yeah.
So let me ask you 2 questions about what's happening in Texas, looking ahead to the 2026 state elections, which are just around the corner, and then we're going to go. So get yourselves ready, please, to jump in here. You are still the best known Democrat in Texas. Isn't that a problem? Where's the bench? We have races coming up in 2026 for governor, lieutenant governor, and all the statewide offices. Literally, if you held me down, I could not give you the name of one person who was a plausible candidate for any of those offices. And this is against the backdrop of a Texas Republican Party that is coming apart at the moment at the hinges. How lame is the Democratic Party of Texas right now that you all can't take advantage of the Civil War? Where are the candidates, and where is your party's effort to take advantage of what's going on?
Yeah. You look at where you have competence in government right now, and it is very often at the local level.
Okay.
You don't have it at the state. I mean, in the energy capital of the world, they cannot keep the lights on, the power running, the heat going. 700 people lost their lives in 2021 because of the absolute incompetence here. The worst run foster care program in America.
In fact, I read in the Texas Tribune today, we're being fined $100,000 a day as a consequence of being unable to get the foster care system stood up.
You talked about public schools. I mean, absolutely incompetent any way you cut it. You look at the job that Andy Brown is doing here in Travis County, Lena Hidalgo is doing in Harris County, Clay Jenkins is doing in Dallas County, all Democrats, but you might not know it because they serve everyone regardless of party. They just want to get the job done, and they are getting the job done. You look at Chris Hollins, up and comer in Harris County. You look at Christian Menefee, who is the county attorney there. I mean, these guys are, and gals, including Lena, they are rock stars. They have yet to hit the statewide stage, but the beginning of 2017, for whatever it's worth, I mean, nobody knew who I was. It was the biggest snowball in hell chance ever to unseat
Which we've talked about in public. I told you. Right? We talked about this in public. Yeah, you said it. What do you think? I said, you'll lose.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you know what? You were right. Because the thing is, if you don't ask, you'll never get it. If you do ask, you might get it. But you got to try.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you think they've got it?
They will. You know, the force in them is very strong. They are.
Do you have any reason to believe that any of the people you just named are thinking about a statewide campaign next time?
I don't have any reason to believe because they haven't told me that. I just see that talent, and I see the ability to connect with people. I see the outstanding job that they've done in positions of public trust. And there are others, you know, Roland Gutierrez, we talked about Colin Allred, who will be a household name very soon. The amount of money that he's raising, which is just amazing.
It's kind of U-level money, isn't it?
He is going to be able to spend that to introduce himself on his own terms to the people of Texas. Very good chance he wins in 2024. If he does not, you know, he's got a great chance at winning in 2026. We're focused on 24. I want him to win. I think he has every chance in the world.
But if he did not win this time, you would think he'd be a leading candidate for some office.
Absolutely. I think he's amazing. No,
people you mentioned who are also not widely, Lena Hidalgo maybe accepted. The people you mentioned are largely not household names outside of the communities they serve.
That's right.
That doesn't concern you because, as you make the point, no one could pick you out of a police lineup before you ran for the Senate either.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. You just don't know. And I just have a lot of faith in those people, and I have even greater faith in the people of Texas. And we've got thousands of volunteers who are going through the process of getting that VDR certification, going out and meeting voters at the UT campus or UTEP campus or wherever they can find them,
Right.
bringing them onto the roll, staying in touch with them. It's not easy work. It's not gonna, turn the trick in one election cycle. It's gonna take us a while, but it's work worth doing. You saw what happened in Georgia in 2020. If you'd said 4 years before that Joe Biden or a Democrat's gonna win the Electoral College Hall, and then there'll be two Senate races that Democrats win both of, you would have said, I'm out of my mind. Think about Texas, 3 times the size of Georgia. Only a quarter of the amount of money that was spent in Georgia is being spent in Texas right now. But look at the trajectory nonetheless. Obama loses his state by 16 points in 2012. Hillary loses it by 9 in 2016. Biden loses it by 5.5 in 2020. None of them spent a dime or a minute in this state. That is a natural trajectory. That's why you have the extraordinary level of voter suppression and voter intimidation. Those in power know what is coming for them. They're trying to stave it off for as long as they can. We have to work just as hard to get over these hurdles to make sure we finally.
So you're optimistic about the all-red race. Do you think Biden can beat Trump in Texas in the next presidential?
It sounds crazy, doesn't it? But if you just look at that line that I graphed for you right now, if you think about the issues that we just talked about, if abortion really is paramount or one of the leading issues in voters' minds,
Right.
and this is the place where not only is it banned, no exception for rape or incest, you saw the report, 26,000 women and girls were forced to carry their rapist child in Texas last year. Holy shit, why are we not absolutely yelling that from the top of every rooftop in the state of Texas? That is horrific. And it is caused by those who are in power right now. Donald Trump, first and foremost, who proudly brags about the fact that he nominated the justices who made that possible in Texas, and then right down the ballot to Greg Abbott, to Dan Patrick, to everyone who put that in place, who voted for that here in the state of Texas. I don't know, man, if we as Democrats, we as people who believe in a woman's ability to make her own decisions about her own life, are able to connect this with enough voters in the state. They don't have to be Democrats. They don't have to think our way on every issue. They just have to be able to connect on this one. So I actually think it is possible. We'll see what happens. For my part, I'm going to do everything that I can. I know I speak for Amy, whether it's donating, whether it's campaigning for, whether it's getting a haircut, whatever we need to do, we're going to get it done to make sure that Joe Biden is the next president of the United States of America.
Okay, we've got about we've got about 15 minutes. We'll take as many questions as we have time for. I apologize in advance if we don't get to everybody. We're going to start in the back. We're going to come up front next. We'll go there third. And then we'll just put your hands up. We'll call on. Please ask a question. Don't make a speech in the interest of giving as many people an opportunity. Yes.
Well, one, thank you so much, Beto, for coming here to the LBJ School. My name is D'Angelo Coulter. I am a first-year impact student here. And my question is mostly for college students. What are some things that you can say to really motivate them, especially when we're seeing laws like SB 17 that are in place that are impacting a lot of college students from many backgrounds?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. I'll say this because it inspires me, even though I wasn't in college for, I guess, 30 years ago was when I was in your position. At every major turning point in this country's history, the vanguard has been led by young people. You know, I was talking about LBJ's speech in March of '65 after John Lewis nearly gave his life. He's talking about those who fought for our independence. I mean, they were 17, 18, 19 years old. Those who landed on the beaches on D-Day in Normandy, 17, 18, 19 years old. Those involuntarily drafted to go fight a war in Vietnam. This country never understood 17, 18, 19 years old. John Lewis, 24 years old, when he really, with his life, purchases this democracy that we're very nearly about to lose. So my faith and confidence is squarely placed in the young people of this country. They've always brought us through at a moment of maximum peril. And they're going to do it again. What I found in that 2018 race that Evan and I have been talking so much about today is that when we show up for one another, when I defy the conventional political wisdom by going to college campuses, everyone said that's the worst use of time. They never vote. They talk a big game. They'll protest. They'll hold up signs. They'll never go to the ballot box. Young people in Texas turned out at an increase of 500% over the previous midterm election because we all showed up for one another. So I think you being here, you asking me this question, us having this conversation, you hopefully joining me later to help me register students here on this campus and stay in touch with them. That's the way that we get this done. There's no magic message. There's no amount of money that we can spend. There's no silver bullet. It takes work, and in a democracy, that work is talking, listening, and being with people, and having that confidence and faith in the young people in this country who have always brought us through. So, you know, I think you could say, look, you've inherited the service, the sacrifice, and the struggle of the generations that have preceded you. Now it's yours. What are you going to do with it?
Good one.
Thanks.
Hi, right here.
Hi, thank you for coming. My name is Colby. I am a student here. One of the big crusades in Texas right now is that of parental rights, but there's a lot of policies in place right now that are in direct opposition of those ideals. For example, the restriction on trans healthcare for youth. I feel like this is indicative of a larger and not so hidden Christian nationalist push to control people from a biblical perspective. How do you see a path forward from this?
Colby, I think you nailed it. I think that's exactly where this is coming from. You look at who is funding, for example, these initiatives to defund public schools and send our taxpayer dollars to private schools. It is these mega billionaires who also happen to be Christian pastors who made no secret about the fact that they believe that the only appropriate education for a Texas child is a Christian education. The attacks on schools and DEI and CRT and porn in the libraries and transgender kids who are going to get your child in the girls' bathroom. I mean, this is another case of us losing our mind. For those who participated in this, losing their minds over stuff that is just on its face absolutely ridiculous, except that it happens to harm and target the most vulnerable in our communities. What's the way forward, you ask? I don't see another one beyond winning elections. You know, on so many issues we've talked about, including voting rights, one might hope that the Department of Justice would come in and enforce whatever remains of the Voting Rights Act, but they have chosen, for whatever reason, not to do that. One would hope that when the Democrats had control of the House and the Senate and the White House, they would have passed and signed into law the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. They didn't do that. There's no cavalry coming. We are on our own. That's why we're doing the work we're doing empowered by people. We've got to register, bring onto the rolls, and turn out enough voters to start winning the state house, city council, school board, and ultimately statewide races so that we can change this. Until we do that, we will continue to live in the fever dream of these extremist Republican conservative, you know, white nationalist Christian education for every child in America, and that's the only way that we're gonna work. We can do better, we know that, but we're not gonna get there until we start winning. We're not gonna start winning until more of us vote.
Can I just jump in and sort of just follow on this? So this is actually the simplest answer, and it has the benefit of also being the one that makes the most sense, which is you cannot expect change to happen unless you change the people responsible, right? Like there is no, if you don't like what's going on, then you've got to have new people in charge. If you do like what's going on, keep the people in charge, right? This is the way this works. Hoping that the people who pass the laws change their mind or can be persuaded. I mean, I guess it's not impossible, but it's highly unlikely. The most efficient way of doing this. I mean, look what Governor Abbott is doing. Governor Abbott is attempting to get school choice passed at the Texas legislature for cycle after cycle. He doesn't have the votes. Rather than changing minds, he decided to change personnel.
That's right.
Right? That's what he's doing in his primary. You would advocate for the same thing. Don't believe those people are going to change their minds. Change those people.
Absolutely. It's not going to come through the courts. It's not going to come through the federal government. It's going to come through us.
The cavalry is not coming is a good way to think about almost everything. Actually, we are the ones we've been looking.
That's right.
Yeah. Over here. And then we'll go to you in the front.
Thank you. Ken Flippin, LBJ alumni. And my question is first about your organization, but beyond voter registration, what are you doing with people after you get them registered to vote to make sure that they do go out and vote? But also in kind of a public policy perspective, we don't have a ballot initiative in this state when it comes to anything. Much
This is a referendum, right?
a referendum
Yeah.
to change that. So how do we make it real when we have all these House seats and Senate seats and statewide seats that we have to flip if we're going to make these extreme policies on abortion effective? Because we may be able to swing some House seats, and I see some, even within the conservatives that are what I'd call pro-life light, some opportunities to maybe get rid of some of the extremes. But it seems like without a ballot initiative, we're looking at maybe 6, 8, 10 years of fighting to get to the point where we can even have these discussions about changing policy on these important issues in Texas.
Yeah, so on the first question, Power by People is a political action committee that started, Evan mentioned this, in 2019. You asked what we do beyond voter registration. Because we're a partisan organization and not a nonprofit, we seek likely Democrats. Others are trying to register everyone and anyone. That's fine, but I think it's insufficient to the task at hand. We've got to get Democrats onto the rolls. And then secondly, and no one's figured this out, and to be candid, I don't know if we will, but we're trying, and we're testing many different ways to do this. That is to stay in touch with the newly registered voter. Previously, what we did is we said, hey, you're registered to vote, good luck. As I mentioned earlier, this is the toughest state in the nation in which to cast that ballot. You know, that person might need some help. That person might understandably be intimidated. That person might be the first in their family to have ever attempted to participate in politics. We've got to stay in touch. So in addition to registering, separately, we asked that newly registered voter if we can stay in touch with them. Amy and I have been every Monday and Wednesday on the campus of the University of Texas at El Paso, registering voters, and then separately asking them if we can stay in touch with them. And not a single person has said no. Every single one of them said, yes, I'd love to stay in touch with you. And that allows us, and by the way, we do it personally, peer to peer. So you're not getting a blast from Colin Albright or the Texas Democratic Party, or even Powered by People. It's Amy O'Rourke who signed you up. It's like, hey, Joe, just checking in with you. Want to remind you that early voting starts in 2 weeks. Your closest early voting location is Vilas Elementary. And remember, you know, abortion is on the ballot, voting rights is on the ballot, you know, gun violence is on the ballot. So that's what we do there. You're right, we don't have a referendum option here in Texas. Just did a book tour around the country, and I was in Little Rock, Arkansas. We had a meeting like this. I was talking about Lawrence Nixon. The book is primarily about him. And folks were so fired up. And then there was an action they could take. They could sign this petition to get abortion access on the ballot in Arkansas. And man, I really wish we had that in Texas, because right away there was something someone could do that would literally make a difference. Here, my call to action is join us, become a volunteer deputy registrar. Help me get these folks on the rolls, stay in touch with them, and then help us win these elections, because that's the answer to your question. It's the only way that it happens. One quick thing. I didn't win in 2018, as you all know, 2.5% shy. But you saw a real sea change in Texas. 12 Democrats defeated 12 incumbent Republicans in the state house. Lena Hidalgo flipped Harris County for the first time in forever for a Democrat to do that. I mentioned the voter turnout going through the roof. You look at what the legislative session did in 2019, those Republicans were somewhat chastened. They were fearful. And then they doubled down in 2021 and 2023 and changed our voting laws to make it.
Well, after the 2020 election turned out not to be the threat to them
That's
that
right.
they thought, when the threat was eliminated, they then went back to doing the kind of things they had done back in 2017.
So if we get Colin already elected this year, I mean, all hell in a good way breaks loose in the state of Texas. Things that seemed impossible are now within reach. And that's why it's so important that we give this election our all, not knowing, you know, whether we are going to win or not, but knowing that we've got to try, and that if we try, there's a chance that we will.
Good. We have time for one more right here in the front, please. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kyla. I'm also a current student here at the LBJ School. Integrity is really one of my pillars here in pursuing a career in public affairs. So my question for you here today is kind of what's your advice or thoughts on how to make sure accountability and transparency is prioritized in, political processes and decision-making processes?
It's something I really care about as well. I mentioned holding a town hall every single month while I was in Congress. I was on city council. I did one every single week. Every Monday at the Village Inn near UTEP, any and all could come, ask me why I voted a certain way on the agenda last week, what's gonna be on the agenda this week. This pothole that I told you about 2 weeks ago still isn't filled yet, so what are you gonna do about it? Now, that wasn't part of my job description. I didn't have to do it, but I knew that in putting myself out there in front of the people that I represented, I could only become better because I feared them in a positive, healthy, constructive way. I didn't want it to be a third week that your pothole wasn't filled. So I was gonna go talk to Daryl Cole, the streets department, make sure that thing got filled because I'm gonna see Mrs. O'Malley and she's gonna ask. I also just learned so much about the people that I was serving. Ideas they had for economic development or for growth. We rewrote the subdivision code under the leadership of my colleague Susie Berg on the city council. What kind of neighborhood do you want to live in? How many parks should we have? What does it mean to be able to walk or to bike to where you want to get to? I learned all that from listening to people because I didn't have all that stuff in my head. I couldn't read enough of it in the books around me. That was such an amazing lever of accountability for me. And same deal in Congress. Every vote I took, I knew I was going to have to explain it to my constituents. Almost no one, by the way, does that anymore. I don't know members of Congress who hold like anyone can come kind of town halls and you can say anything you want. And
Well, first of all, they started to get screamed at and they backed off of doing that. But second of all, most of them now live in places where their elections are not competitive, so there's really no incentive for them to have to do it.
So
Right.
in your career,
That's it.
and if I could be so bold as to offer any advice,
Go.
you know, democracy, the fundamentals haven't changed in the last 2,400 years. It's about people connecting with people. And face-to-face, eyeball to eyeball, human to human, most powerful connection on the planet. Everything else is interference. Social media, TV ads, slick mailers. That's the accountability and integrity, I think, that I hear in your question. So when I defeated Sylvester Reyes, big upset in 2012 for Congress, I won that by knocking on doors every single day and meeting people where they work, hearing about them. And then obviously once in Congress, being accountable to them. And I'll tell you, closing story, towards the end of the campaign, I'd knock 100, 120 doors a day, every single day. I've learned so much doing that. It's a Thursday, I meet this woman at her home, she invites me in, makes me coffee. We don't really talk about policy or politics. Her daughter's a school teacher, her grandson's in the Marines, she's so proud of them. I spend about 30 minutes, leave her house, keep knocking doors. That next week, on Monday, I walk into a diner and this guy stops me and says, "Are you Beto?" I am. "Well, you knocked on my grandmother's door last Thursday. And you probably don't know this, but I and my 32 other cousins have menudo at her house every Sunday. And so last Sunday, she had all of us around and she made each of us promise to vote for you." I have no idea who you are, but you're gonna win this race. Thanks for the question.
Well, we're ending on democracy. That's a good thing. Please give Congressman Beto O'Rourke a big hand. Thank you all for coming. Appreciate you. Good.